All right, so Eric, a long time ago, before I was married, this woman asked me to have sex with her on the hood of her Honda Civic. I said, listen, if I'm going to have sex with you, it's going to be on my own accord. It's the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Welcome to episode 80 of the Paperback Warrior Podcast. My name is Eric, and I'm elated to be back here with my broadcast partner, Tom. Paperback Warrior is a weekly show where we discuss old paperback books from the 20th century in a variety of genres, including crime, pulp, adventure, espionage, science fiction, horror, and even a little sleaze thrown in there. The show's an outgrowth of our blog at paperbackwarrior.com, where you can find thousands of reviews and articles about all these old books with new content. We've got a really good show for you today, and Tom's going to tell us all about it.
Thank you, Eric. So we got two big things going on. The first is a feature that I'm calling Two Decoys, because you and I are going to discuss, review, and analyze two entirely separate series titles called Decoy. The first was written under the pseudonym of Jim Dean in the 1970s, and the second Decoy series was written under the pseudonym Stephen Robertson in the 1980s. Now, the headliner, obviously, is for my review today, and I'm going to tell you about this new book called Later, and it's by a young upstart author named Stephen King. The book comes out tomorrow from this famous reprint publishing house called Hard Case Crime. The publisher was kind enough to send me an advance review copy, and I'm going to tell you all about the book at the end of the show. What is your review today, Eric?
I've heard of that Stephen King guy.
He's going places, I hear.
I think so. Well, today I'm going to be reviewing a 1948 private eye novel called The Body in the Bed by Bill S. Ballinger.
Right on. Okay, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about that. But before we get into the feature, can I tell you about some new acquisitions I've made?
This normally means I'm getting a gift, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about 3 books. Let me hand these to you. Tell the listeners what I'm handed to you, and give me your initial impressions of these 3 books.
All right, so I have Uninvited Corpse by the author Paul Welton, and it's a Gary Dean mystery. And the cover art looks like typical of mid-30s, 40s kind of cover art. Not spectacular. Pardon My Blood, again by the same author, and again a Gary Dean mystery, and again same old cover art. And Flash, Hold for Murder, a Gary Dean mystery by Paul Welton, of all things. So 3 books.
Right, 3 books in this Gary Dean series by Paul Welton. What do you think of the covers? Be honest.
So I just finished a Harry Whittington book called Murder is My Mistress, and it had the same kind of cover. It's kind of like brown and yellow.
Was it from Graphic Books?
Yeah, I think it was Graphic Books.
Yeah,
maybe.
he sold a lot to Graphic Books. Graphic Books did some good covers, but they did a lot of really terrible covers. I cannot tell you how much I hate these covers, these Paul Welton books.
I love Edward Aarons has The Net. Have you seen that cover? It's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's like at some point Graphic decided to start doing good covers, but that wasn't then.
No.
So this Paul Welton, he was a real guy, and there were 6 books in this Gary Dean series, spanning from Death and the Devil from 1944 to In Comes Death from 1951. Some lists have 7 books in the series, but I think they're double counting a retitled book in there. They do that sometimes. They retitle a book and re-release it. Some of the books were re-released by Graphic Books under new names. So, like, The Women Are Skin Deep from 1948 becomes The Uninvited Corpse when it becomes a graphic paperback. So, in 1950. And I hate it when they do that, but no one ever called me to ask me for advice in 1948 about how to market these things. Anyway, that's aside. This character, Gary Dean, he's a hard-boiled newspaper reporter in this fictional metropolis of Bell City. The books are told in the first person, and the character lays on the hard-boiled, manly vernacular very thick in these books. I always like that for some reason.
Yes.
That always appeals to me. Anyway, every book finds this reporter embroiled in another mysterious adventure featuring mobsters, dames, con men, booze, and sex. I learned about the books and the character from the thrilling detective website, who called the series a delightful slice of American cheese. And meanwhile, Bill Pronzini calls them alternative classics. I read the first few pages of a couple of the paperbacks just to kind of get a feel for it, and the author, Paul Welton, is definitely emulating Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer, or maybe even Carol John Daly's Race Williams character. I really like that style of writing, so I think I'm actually going to get into these books. Paul Welton, his primary job was actually working as a rewrite man for the big city newspapers. He was born in Boston, and according to my research, these Gary Dean mysteries were the only books that he wrote. I'm going to probably start with the first one. Actually, I may not go with the first one because it was from the 1940s, and I really like books that were written in the 50s. So I'll probably go with Pardon My Blood, I think, from all those, from 1950. It's book number 5, and I'm hoping by that point he found the rhythm and that everyone was just doing a better job, I think, with economical storytelling in the 1950s during that paperback revolution. They tend to have less characters then. I've been reading so many books from the 30s and early 40s.
I noticed.
And they have so many characters in them. And they're all that traditional mystery where at the end the detective gathers everyone into a room and explains how he got them. It's a bit of a tired format to me. By 1950, things were getting a lot more interesting. So, Eric, we're currently living in this golden age of reprints with companies like Stark House and Cutting Edge and Mysterious Press and dozens of small reprint houses bringing these old series titles back to life. But for some reason, none of them have been turned onto the Gary Dean series by Paul Welton. Well, reprint houses, I know you listen. Allow me to say that I didn't mean to turn you on, but this series is definitely worth a second look.
I like it. I noticed, like maybe a year and a half ago, even you really wouldn't read anything from prior to 1950. You just didn't do it, and you didn't really mock me, but you were like, Mickey Spillane really isn't my guy. My camera's not my guy. It's the 40s stuff. But somewhere along the way, you've changed because you've got a slew of pulp reviews that you've sent over, and you're reading a lot of early stuff.
Two things happened.
Okay.
I had to. Through a bunch of series of events, I had a ton of Amazon money that I wanted to spend before my wife spent it. Yeah. And so I started ordering these collections of pulp detective compilations from Steger Books or Altus Press, same company.
Like that,
and they have beautiful covers and all that. And what I like about them is I've got this attention span issue lately where I can't tackle even like a 200 or 300 page book. So if it's over 180 pages, even then I'm stressing out trying to finish it because a lot of these books aren't that good that we review. But these novellas that originally appeared in the pulps end up being about 60 to 70 pages, and they get compiled. And so I've really been enjoying these 60-page novellas that are piled into like 3 novellas per book with the same character and the same author by Steger Books. And so that's sort of where I'm at. Not all my reviews are positive, but every now and then I'll read a really good one. And so, I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah.
Do you got anything we'd talk about before, or should we just go right to the feature?
No, this is a good segue, real fast. So I do have something.
Yeah, lay it on me.
So I received 2 books in the mail from our pal Lee Goldberg at Cutting Edge. He also runs Brash Books, but I got 2 books in the mail. These are reprints of 2 John Sanford novels, and Sanford is spelled Sanford, not the John Sandford author that writes...
Not the Prey books.
Yeah.
Okay.
He writes, what, Davenport or something? Does he write those? Or I can't remember.
Yeah. Lucas Davenport's the character. They're not bad, but they're very contemporary.
Okay. So this John Sanford that we're talking about was an author of novels and stories from 1933 through the early 80s. And these 2 books are standalone novels. The first is called The Old Man's Place, which was originally published in 1935. We're going way back. And then later reprinted by Signet as The Hard Guys. It was made into a film, and from what I read about the novel, it's supposed to be this really brutal novel, like this really brutal story.
I have the original. Was this the mail order bride one?
Mail order bride?
I think the dudes order a mail order bride, don't they? Like a bunch of these,
they do. Yeah,
bunch of these
right.
guys who like work on the dock.
Yes.
No, I have that. I have the original paperback. It's under a different name though.
This is the Hard Guys?
Yeah. What's the author? I think there was a different author then, or maybe not. Did he write that under a pseudonym originally?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Right, maybe just Sanford. I can check. But the premise was so ridiculous. I was like, oh my god, I need to have this book. I haven't read it either.
Okay.
So you should definitely read it, especially if you got Lee's copy of it.
I keep thinking it's going to be like the Hateful Eight, where they're just kind of stuck in this one place, and the girls there, and they're just.
My impression is that these dudes are like super blue collar guys, and they get bored, and they order a mail order bride between them, and she shows up, and there's like I don't know if there's like 8 dudes running a train on her, or what happens. Well, it was 1930s, so they wouldn't be that explicit, but
it's supposed to be a violent story.
It seems like such a cool premise, and the original cover art was amazing. Tell me the title and author again, just so the reader.
Yeah, so this is going to be out on June 1st, and it's called The Old Man's Place by John Sanford. And I plan on reviewing it. I got a copy, so good, bad, or indifferent. It's going to be on the blog or show. The second one is called Make My Bed in Hell, again by John Sanford. It was originally published in 1939 under a title called 70 times 7. And it's been reprinted a few times, including Avon, looks like in the 1950s. The short synopsis on this, listen to this. Aaron Platt has spent every day of his life breaking his back to scrape a living from the rocky, played-out fields of the farm he inherited from his sadistic father. One winter morning, he follows footprints in the snow to his barn and discovers a man freezing to death in a horse stall. What unfolds between the two men, past and present, is this brisk, gritty depiction of crime and punishment. So it sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds good.
I'll have to read that and review that as well. But again, both of these released on June 1 by, I'm sorry, it's not by Cutting Edge, it's by Brash Books. I got them switched. So coming out by Brash Books, and you can pre-order them now on Amazon, and they're out in paperback and Kindle.
Yeah,
So,
this is such a golden age we're living in right now of reprints. Like every
amazing.
old book that I look up, I'm like, oh, it's already been reprinted,
Yeah.
or it's available on Kindle. It's just such a good deal.
Yeah.
All right, so should we go into the feature?
Lay it on us.
All right, play some music. So the feature today is called Two Decoys, and it started from a practice that Eric and I began a couple years ago to deconflict with one another. When either of us begins a novel with the intention of reviewing it for the blog or the podcast, we text the other guy a photo of the book in question. Now, we do this for two important reasons. One, we need to ensure that we both aren't starting the same book at the same time, which is something that eventually is going to happen.
Yeah.
And two, the other guy can weigh in if we're starting a book that's already been reviewed on the blog. At this point, we've done so many reviews that it's entirely possible that I may not remember that Eric reviewed Don't Get Caught, the 1951 Carter Cullen book that Eric reviewed back in 2019, and I keep reaching for it and thinking, I wonder if Eric reviewed this. And so we serve as a safety net for each other. Is that fair to say, Eric?
Yeah, and but heads up, though, I will never, ever send you a photo of a book that I'm reading that has this barrel-chested, bullet belt guy, running around in the jungle like MIA Hunter or Eagle Force or something like that. Because the likelihood of you reading one of those is pretty slim, right?
No, I agree. So, yeah. I mean, there's books out there that clearly I will not touch with a 10-foot pole.
But otherwise.
But your the breadth of what you read seems to be much wider.
It is. And I'll say it's important to remember that a lot of these vintage paperbacks have gone through multiple printings, and they've all got, different cover variations. And I can pick up a printing of a book from, 1975 and realize that you reviewed it from a 1955 version or a different color variation or something like that. So
it's happened. In fact, there were a couple. I think you read a book by that Canadian author Douglas Sanderson, and then you sat down to write your review and realized that I had already read and reviewed it.
Right? Yeah, the flooding one. Yep.
Yeah, right. So I sent Eric a photo of a book I was starting. It was the first book in a series called Decoy by Stephen Robertson, and Eric responded that he thought he had already reviewed Decoy number 1. I checked our archives, and he did review Decoy number 1, but it was a completely different Decoy series written by Jim Dean. So I thought it'd be fun for us to cover the two Decoy series titles in this feature, Eric. Your review came first, and your Decoy came first, so why don't you tell us about your Decoy?
So Decoy was a 2-book series. It was published by Signet in 1974 and 1975 under the name Jim Dean. Now, both books have copyrights attributed to Paul Gillette Enterprises. The only other books written by Jim Dean were The Mistress book and The Fine Art of Picking Up Women, both published by Pinnacle in 1972 and 1974. Have you read either of those books?
Man, I do not need books, Eric, to teach me the fine art of picking up women. I'm a 50-year-old suburban white guy who just got over colon cancer, who spends all my time reading 70-year-old paperbacks. I could have written that book, bro.
Oh, I love it. Okay. That's fair enough. But where I'm going with this is that there's good reason to believe that Jim Dean is a pseudonym for this Paul Gillette guy. And he co-wrote some of the, is it Coxman or Coaxman?
It's Coxman, but they spell it Coaxman because they didn't want to be too dirty.
Okay, so he wrote the Coxman Sexy Spy parodies under the house name Troy Conway, along with his co-author, who was Charles Fritsch. And you've reviewed those before, I think.
I've reviewed Charles Fritsch books. But
Okay.
I have a couple of Coxman, but I haven't read any.
I learned this from the comment section of the Glorious Trash blog. And I also see that Gillette wrote the novelization of the Clint Eastwood movie Play Misty for me.
Man, did you ever see that movie?
So listen to this. That was a really weird role for Clint Eastwood, right?
Yeah, I liked it a lot.
You liked it?
I was a kid, right? But it was kind of like Fatal Attraction. Like Clint Eastwood, as I recall, he played a radio DJ who had a female stalker fan.
Okay. So think about this, though. In the 80s, I was really into Magnum Force and Dirty Harry and all those movies and that came on cable television. And my parents were perfectly fine with me watching them, right?
Yeah.
But, Tom, when that movie was airing on cable, the Play Misty for me, my parents said it was too mature for me to watch it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Was it the? I don't even know. Was it edited? Was it like on HBO cable where they would have like nudity and bad words, or was it like on TBS where they would have edited all that?
This was all WGN stuff.
WGN, okay, yeah, Chicago Channel 9.
So Dirty Harry blowing people away, it's perfectly fine.
It's just so funny.
Play Misty for me, not allowed.
It's such an American thing that our parents were so worried about us getting exposed to sex, but they had no problem with us being exposed to violence. And here we are with all these murders in our country.
It's crazy. But you know what? Under the strict guidance from my parents, I've yet to see that movie.
Oh, I mean, you're not missing a whole lot.
Okay.
It's not a classic. It was worth seeing. But,
all right.
So anyway, this guy wrote the novelization to play Misty for me. What else do we know?
So anyway, the fact of the matter is that Jim Dean is either Paul Gillette or he's not. And I tend to think it's a pseudonym. But in any case, the first thing that jumps out at you with this Decoy series is that the covers are awesome. And it looks like the model was Steve Holland, and the illustrator was a pretty famous guy, Jack Ferragasso. Mm-hmm. And the covers have these really sexy babes in various states of undress, and boats are exploding, and pistols are being leveled at the bad guys, helicopters are landing. The covers really make you want to read the books, don't they?
Yeah, I'm holding them in my hand right now because I have both of these Decoy books by Jim Dean in my library, and these covers are amazing. Like, these covers really do make me want to read the book. They're just absolutely remarkable.
The first one is called The Great Pretender, and the second one is called Moon Over Miami.
Now, how were they? You actually read one or both?
I read the first one. And Tom, it was god-awful. It was so bad that I couldn't bring myself to read that second one.
Oh, man, that's a letdown. Tell me what you know about it, though, for the listener and me.
All right, so this first book is called The Great Pretender, and it stars a character named Nick Merlotti. And Nick is this high-profile criminal known to the public as the Great Pretender, or the Clown Prince of Crime is what they call him. So Merlotti makes the papers by stealing this priceless museum painting, and he inserts his own photo in its place. It's a pretty cool trick. So anyway, Merlotti is eventually captured, and he's prosecuted, but his unique talents allow him to make multiple prison escapes, and then he just keeps getting recaptured again and again, and eventually he will legitimately serve time, and he's finally released. So in the opening chapter of this book, Merlotti is approached by the feds, and he's asked to infiltrate this high-profile mobster's intimate circle of friends. And they want Merlotti to do this so the feds can determine which police officers are tipping off and working with the mafia. So with absolutely no backstory to validate any of this, the author lazily explains that Merlotti has a computer brain, and it allows him to quickly quell and escape conflicts, decipher the most complex problems, and perform a heroic display of self-defense tactics.
It's funny their conception of computers in the 1970s. That was such a trope back then. The computer this, computer that, computer brain.
Computer brain.
Yeah.
So there's no mentioning of Merlotti's past until page 134, and it's only a 166-page book, right?
Right.
It's disclosed that Merlotti is this former U.S. Marine, and partnering with Merlotti is this gadget whiz, and his name is Waves, and he's assisting with recording and monitoring the mission. So real fast, the second chapter has Merlotti surrounded by scantily clad women on this beach in New York, and he picks this woman named Jane, and they swim a little, and then they have intercourse before and after dinner, I might add. Merlotti has one of the most incomprehensible strategies that any hero of any men's action-adventure novel has ever displayed.
Lay it on me.
All right, here you go. Here's his strategy on how to infiltrate the mob. Merlotti hatches a plan to intercept a yacht filled with heroin intended for the mobster he's supposed to befriend and infiltrate, right? Mm-hmm. There's no explanation of how Merlotti knows about the yacht or its destination. But by stealing the heroin, he'll then go to the mobster and explain he didn't know it was intended for him, and then he'll just give it back to him to earn his respect and trust.
Okay.
So it's not a terrible strategy up front. It's moronic, but it makes some sense.
Right.
But to do this, he plans on just borrowing a U.S. Coast Guard boat and a machine gun. There's absolutely no mention of how he manages to steal a government boat or where he obtains a machine gun. There's not even a mention of what kind of firearm it is. It's just listed as a machine gun. The next chapter has Merlotti on the Coast Guard boat with the machine gun.
Is that easy, huh?
Yeah, like anyone can just walk up on a Coast Guard boat and just take it for a leisurely cruise.
1974 was a much simpler world. This was pre-9/11, pre-everything.
I guess so. So, of course, in the book, the plan works out perfectly, and Merlotti easily intercepts and steals this boatload of heroin, which is revealed to actually be a load of sugar. It's not heroin, but it's sugar. There's this mess where Merlotti explains to the mobster that he actually intended to steal his heroin, and then the feds asked him to infiltrate his circle so he can kind of spy on him. This is bonkers stuff. I mean, it's just bonkers. And here's the thing. the feds already have insiders in this mobster's empire. Like they already have the the informants. Why do they even need him?
This is terrible plotting.
It's ridiculous. Anyway, there's no action really. He just goes back and forth with talking to the feds and talking to the mobster and getting laid. That's it. And one more thing. I swear I'm not going to beat this in the ground, but at one point he's talking to this female character, right? Mm-hmm. The author forgets that the female character isn't in the scene. The female character is somewhere else because we've already been told that she's in another part of the city. He's sitting here having a conversation with this character who's doing something totally different in another part of the city. He forgets his own characters and where they are in the story.
It's like nobody edited this thing.
That's what I was going to ask you. How does a book like this get through Signet? They have an editing gauntlet. How does it make it through?
They just didn't care. They're just selling a cover. Literally, this book is a cover. Is it might as well be filled with like styrofoam peanuts.
Someone's got to be reading it, though.
I don't know.
Anyway, go. We spent too much time on this.
All right, so there's zero chance you're going to read the sequel, huh?
I mean, I said that about Road Blaster, and there's 3 Road Blaster book reviews up, so who knows?
All right, well, anyway, it was quite a scathing review. The book was Decoy, The Great Pretender by Jim Dean, and I'm really sorry, Eric, to bring up such a painful memory and force you to relive it on the show today.
Yeah, the only good memory I had was that I read it in one of those beautiful bread and breakfast inns down in historic downtown St. Augustine. So
that's nice, at least. All right, so we're going to shift gears to my Decoy series. I'm going to hand 2 of the books over just so you can take a look at them. I don't know if you've ever seen these in real life. My Decoy series was actually started in 1989, and it went on for 4 installments, all published by Pinnacle Books under the pseudonym of Stephen Robertson. The actual author is this guy named Robert Walker, who is still around and still writing. He has many successful mystery series characters and standalone horror novels. In his career, he also used the pen names of Jeffrey Kane, Glenn Hale, and Evan Kingsbury. Now, his take on the Decoy series bears absolutely zero resemblance to the one that you just reviewed, Eric.
Thank God.
My Decoy series, really his, is about a Chicago cop named Ryan Lanark, who used to be an acclaimed stage actor who then becomes a police detective, and he uses his acting skills for undercover assignments, mostly as a decoy, like a cop who, for example, pretends to be a drunk walking down the street in hopes of luring a mugger out of an alley. Now, Ryan has a secret. The reason he became a cop was because his family was killed by street punks who were out on a thrill kill session. He becomes a police generally to take his brutal revenge out on street criminals, but specifically to catch the punks who killed his family. So the search for his family's killers is a plot thread that stretches throughout the 4 books in the series. Unlike you, Eric, I did my homework for this segment and tracked down the author of my Decoy series. I interviewed Robert Walker about his memories of the book in an email exchange. He told me that he based the character of Ryan on the character of Sergeant Mick Belker, also known as Animal, on the TV show Hill Street Blues. You ever watch that show?
Yep, okay, yeah.
Right, so, but what he did, his take on it, though, was he made Ryan a polished, good-looking guy with basically the same undercover operation skill set. Around the same time that Walker learned about actor Patrick Duffy's terrible true life story about how his parents were murdered in their own tavern that they operated. This actually happened in 1986, and the murder was adapted into the story as to how Ryan's parents in these Decoy books were actually killed in the Decoy book. So it's loosely based on what actually happened to Patrick Duffy's parents. So when it comes time to publish the series, he picks the pseudonym Stephen Robertson because Mr. Walker had a son named Stephen, and he liked the pun of Stephen, Robert's son. Now, the reason for the pseudonym in the first place was because Mr. Walker had another series going at the same time starring a medical examiner named Dean Grant that he was publishing under his own name, also with Pinnacle. Now, the publishing house at Pinnacle, they thought that it was a bad idea to have 2 series titles from the same author coming out in the same month because bookstores might choose to carry one title but not the other. So that's why he deployed the pseudonym.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So the first 3 books in the series were all packaged with similar cover art. Now, I actually like the art and are clearly part of the Decoy series. Now, Pinnacle, it just makes me scratch my head. They packaged the 4th book as if it was a standalone novel called The Handyman by Stephen Robertson. There's no indication at all on the 4th book that it's part of this Decoy series starring Ryan Lanark until you actually start reading it. Mr. Walker told me that his editor at Pinnacle said that he was doing Walker a favor by packaging the book this way to lift his work out of the men's adventure series ghetto, as the editor called it.
That's interesting.
It is. So as someone, myself and you, I know, we don't have a bias against branded series titles. I think this was a huge misstep by Pinnacle, and it proved to be the end of the series. Mr. Walker told me that the book sold between 40,000 and 50,000 copies each, and they were regarded as a mid-list commercial success. Now, Mr. Walker's written and published about 84 novels, and he teaches writing at West Virginia State University. All 4 of the Decoy books are available on Kindle with new titles and covers, but the text of the stories hasn't changed a word. Now, if you want to get them on Kindle, they're under Robert Walker's own name, and if you subscribe to the Kindle Unlimited program, you can read them for free. And all 4 books are also available on Audible as audiobooks.
Back then, and you said mid-list commercial success, back then 40,000 and 50,000 copies of these paperbacks, I'm assuming, was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it was enough for, the guy's not going to become a millionaire from that, but for a working author, you could pay off your advance, Pinnacle makes some money, books don't hopefully get stripped and sent back. This isn't a bestseller, but there is a lot of people out there who made a living as mid-list authors. And then the writers that I know talk about at some point, the publishing houses decided that mid-list authors were not worth their time or effort to have the overhead to bring in the editors and design the covers, and they literally just canceled them all and just went for nothing except for the big blockbusters.
So we talk about 40 to 50,000 copies. I mean, was something like Death Merchant selling about the same, or were they?
I'd say so.
Or were they high?
No, I don't know, but I know Death Merchant was underperforming in the Pinnacle stable, like compared to Executioner and a lot of the other series that they were running. I know Destroyer was outperforming Death Merchant. I don't have actual numbers though, but you can sort of almost do the math that you can see like how many copies are sold. They sometimes advertise that at the top of it.
Okay.
So anyway, the guy was really generous with his time in answering my questions in the email, and he was a great guy, and he's super respected in the contemporary mystery fiction world.
So you read the first Decoy book, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how was it?
It was good. It was very well written, but definitely it was a product of its time. In this first adventure of the series, we meet Ryan, and we quickly learn that he does not play well with other cops. And so they keep attempting to foist a partner on him, and it usually ends up in like fist fights or something worse. So he gets sent to Precinct 13 in Chicago, which is like the last chance stop for screw-up cops. And he's assigned his first female partner, really good-looking girl named Shannon. Over time, the relationship takes the exact story arc you would expect in a 1980s police procedural where like a bad boy cop is partnered with a hot female partner. So what's happening, though, in the background of all this and becomes the actual plot is there's this white glove murderer who is menacing Chicago by raping, surgically disfiguring, and murdering victims. Now, the crimes, as described by the author, are particularly gruesome and graphic, and even by like fictional serial killer standards. So if you like intense vaginal trauma, you're really going to enjoy this book. If not, maybe it's going to be a little squeamish for you.
Wow.
Ryan wants a piece of this investigation, and the basically investigation follows the exact same story arc you'd expect. It's not bad, but it sort of lacks the fun, over-the-top pulpiness that Pinnacle Books really was delivering to readers in the 1970s. Mostly, I liked Decoy. It's a well-crafted police procedural, and the lead characters are very interesting, and Walker was a good but very workman-like writer 30 years ago, and so he delivered a paperback very consistent with late 1980s cop action standards. So if this sounds like your thing, listener, you're going to dig this book. I'm probably more at home in the world of 1950s and 1960s crime fiction, but I really did enjoy the book and this little detour to 1989. So I can definitely recommend it. Again, the book is Decoy by Stephen Robertson, and you can probably find it under the name of Robert Walker now. As an aside, as we're wrapping up our decoys, is Edward S. Ahrens also had a 1951 standalone novel called The Decoy that I'm handing to you right now. And you may have to tackle that one day since you're our Edward S. Ahrens guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, that concludes our Decoy section. Why don't you go ahead and do a book review, and then I'll talk about the Stephen King thing.
All right, great. Yeah, so I want to talk about a book called The Body in the Bed by an author that should be familiar to crime fiction and crime noir enthusiast Bill S. Ballinger. Now, Ballinger wrote over 150 teleplays, including episodes of The Outer Limits, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and most of his career spent in radio and television. Ballinger still found the opportunity to author nearly 30 novels. His first, The Body in the Bed, was published in 1948, and is the first of 2 books starring a Chicago detective named Barr Breed. Barr is B-A-R-R. Breed is sort of an unusual private eye for the time period. he runs a detective staffing agency. And so they supply things like guards for banks and railroad detectives, and they even do, what do you call them, secret shopper security for retail stores. So he's not a traditional private eye, he's sort of a staffer. But when a guy named Gibbs knocks on Breed's door wanting a traditional private eye, Breed listens to his story and finds himself immersed with Gibbs' problem. You see, Gibbs explains that he's an account executive that travels all over the country. He's happily married, but he's a cheater. So in Chicago, Gibbs has a main squeeze, which is a woman with the last name McCormick. Gibbs explains that while he's at the hotel and he's in the shower after intimacy with this McCormick girl, someone attacked her, strangled her to death, and then tucked her into his bed. Gibbs gets back into bed and finds her dead, and then runs to the nearest detective agency, which just happens to be Breed's. So it's the old wake up and see a corpse in the bed sort of thing.
Yeah.
Been done 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
After Gibbs produces a wad of cash, Breed makes him a deal. He advises him that the money will buy Gibbs 7 days. And so in that time, Gibbs just needs to go and lie low and allow Breed to find the killer. But shortly after Gibbs hires Breed, he takes a point-blank shotgun blast right to the chest. To complicate things even more, Gibbs' own wife is found murdered as well. So, thrust into this bizarre and deadly love triangle, Breed must find who the killer is and the motive behind the 3 slayings. In the first half of this book, Ballinger writes Breed to be this really arrogant and undeveloped sort of protagonist. But the novel's second half really changed my tune and my view on this guy. Breed is this fighter who survives torture. He escapes from killers. He's kind of the guy who shoots straight, and he's a real ladies' man. So I like the fact that Ballinger allows Breed the patience to sort of let the problems fix themselves. There's the typical wisecracking stuff that you get with this era. Overall, really liked the character in the book, and I also like that it's written in the first-person perspective. I think detective books should all be written that way. I like that tight-angle view instead of having this panoramic shot that has too many characters and all of their own thoughts. Ballinger eventually changes his writing style to a shifting first-person narration.
Yeah, he became famous for that in the 1950s. That was like his whole thing.
Yeah, but The Body in the Bed isn't like that. And I liked this book, and I really want to find the sequel, which is called The Body Beautiful. Yeah, great stuff. So that brings us to you.
All right, cool. So for my review today, I want to talk to you about the new Stephen King book, a paperback original called Later from Hard Case Crime. Now, before I get into this review, I need to give a little bit of background that might be necessary to understand why America's favorite vintage paperback podcast is reviewing a new book by America's most popular living author. It has a lot to do with the paperback publisher that Stephen King chose for this release. So since 2004, Hard Case Crime has really been the nation's most successful publisher of new and reprint crime fiction, which is bolstered by a winning stable of modern authors, as well as predominantly wise choices of classic crime fiction reprints selected by the company founder Charles Ardai. I've been critical of their publishing title and author choices over the past few years, but I still have a lot of respect for the brand. And meanwhile, I've also been a Stephen King fan since I was 13 years old. So let's go back in time. So 2005, Hard Case Crime was this upstart paperback house when they struck literary gold with the publication of Stephen King's The Colorado Kid. Now, they found themselves with a monster hit on their hands and a New York Times best-selling paperback original mystery novel from the king of horror. It happened again in 2013 with a book called Joyland. And this one was also a huge commercial success for both Stephen King and Hard Case Crime. So let's get down to the present. So here we are, 8 years later in 2021 with a new Stephen King paperback from Hard Case Crime called Later. The first thing you're going to notice, Eric, as I handed this to you, is the amazingly vivid and totally on-brand cover art from this illustrator, Paul Mann. And it depicts this hot, totally stacked female police detective leaning up against a car with a shy kid next to her, and the tagline, quote, "Only the dead have no secrets." Our narrator in this book is a 22-year-old young man named Jamie Conklin, and he's telling the story of things that happened when he was a kid. Now, Jamie is the only son of a single mother who's a literary agent in Manhattan. Jamie also sees dead people, pretty much just like the kid in the movie The Sixth Sense. And he warns the reader in his intro, he's telling the story that, "I think this is a horror story. And I'd say that's the truth. The story takes a while to heat up before things get truly scary, but it's a horror novel. Jamie explains that dead people, when he sees them, always tell the truth when they talk to him. And that's like a very important plot point. I'm not going to spoil this for you. Yeah. Sometimes these dead people say things funny and very blunt about telling the boy that his school art project sucks. And other times it's like a useful tip as to where the old lady hid her jewels before she passed away. His access to the dead people is really only limited to the few days after they die and before the deceased have kind of faded away into the great beyond. And Jamie's very candid with his mom about this ability, but she warns him correctly to never tell anybody that he sees dead people. Now, so later the plot jumps around quite a bit while focusing on Jamie's upbringing and a variety of incidences where his ability to see and elicit information from dead people proves to be useful. Mom's close friend is a NYPD detective named Liz Dutton, and she's the stacked brunette on the book's cover. Over time, Liz comes to believe and accept Jamie's sixth sense and figures out some uses for it in the realm of her police work. As such, Jamie gets pressed into service by Liz to help solve some crimes using this unusual ability. Stephen King writes this later book that we're reviewing in a very breezy first-person style with very, very short chapters that are easy to follow, despite the fact that the timeline is often non-linear. It takes forever in this book for an actual plot to develop, but I have to say I didn't really mind because Jamie's a super likable kid and he makes the reader invested in his upbringing. As advertised, the paperback eventually becomes a horror story, with really, Eric, some honest-to-goodness creepy and unsettling set pieces that really reminds the readers that Stephen King still has chops. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot I can tell you without spoiling the fun for you. I found later to be really, it was a very quick read. It was fulfilling. I would say it's the strongest and most on-brand of the 3 hard case crime novels that Stephen King wrote. I mean, again, Stephen King really excels at this sort of coming-of-age horror story with vivid characters and chilling situations and good confronting supernatural evil. I would say, because Stephen King has written so many books, Later is unlikely to be anybody's favorite Stephen King novel, but I can't imagine any Stephen King fan walking away from this book dissatisfied, because I found the whole thing, it was a very superb little novel.
So you're mostly saying this is horror. Is it crime fiction as well?
Nah, I mean, again, the introduction of this police character, I thought that's where it was going, right? I thought that it's going to be he partners up with this police detective and they drive around solving crimes with him using his, I see dead people ability and her putting handcuffs on people. And he sort of telegraphs that that's how it goes, and that's how it's going to happen. And the cover certainly would lead you to believe that. But it takes a really interesting left turn and becomes just really a straight-up Stephen King horror novel.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is not what you think it's going to be at all. And again, I'm not spoiling anything by saying that because he tells you that in the very first page of the book that this is a horror novel.
Okay, so it's unlike Joyland, which had a supernatural element, but mostly
no, I mean, this is a straight up Stephen King novel. This is not like Mr. Mercedes. Do you ever read that?
I haven't.
I didn't like it, but it's the whole thing. But Mr. Mercedes is just a crime novel, right? It's about a guy trying to solve a serial killer story with the help of a autistic female, who becomes his partner later in the series.
Okay.
That one's just a detective novel. This is a Stephen King horror novel where a kid is getting haunted, basically. Okay. And so it's good though. It's worth reading. I'm sort of surprised that this is the one that he shopped with Hard Case Crime, but it's also a short book, and so it's not that kind of Stephen King novel that you're going to be able to hammer nails with.
They asked King one time in reference to genre, and he said, "I don't care what you call me, as long as the check cashes."
Yeah, that seems pretty consistent with his career.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're running a bit long, so why don't you put a pin in this one?
All right, so that wraps up another episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. Please join us on Facebook and Twitter to continue the conversation, but most importantly, check out our daily book reviews at paperbackwarrior.com. With archives going back for several years, you have no excuse to ever say, I don't know what to read next. They're all right there for you. Please review us on iTunes and donate to the show via PayPal to keep us ad-free. The donate link is there on the homepage. And on behalf of Tom, this is Eric signing off, and we'll see you next Monday.